Welcome to CNI Jerusalem, calling your source for unfiltered Mideast talk radio. I'm your host, Dr. Faye Williams, and today we have a very special guest. We're going to be talking with Ambassador Maen Areikat. How are you today?
I'm just fine, enjoying the warmer weather.
I know that you've been working very hard on a cause that I, too, have been involved in for a number of years, and that is peace and independence for our brothers and sisters in Palestine. I just want to say to you as we start, I've had an opportunity to see a lot of things happen on October 12th. I just happened to notice that was your birthday.
Right.
That was the day that I became national chair of the National Congress of Black Women, and I don't know if you know the civil rights activist Dick Gregory. He was born on that day. And, of course, you know, Columbus claims to have discovered America on October 12th.
Really?
But, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Three out of four good things aren't bad, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's good to know.
So we want to just talk a little bit about your involvement in what's happening in Palestine. And we know that you've served as Director General, the Negotiations Affairs Department of the PLO. And, by the way, I have been to Palestine many times, so as we talk, many of these things are of personal interest to me in terms of what's going on.
All right.
Now, as we get closer to the first year anniversary of President Barack Obama's inauguration, what are your assessments of his efforts in the peace process at this point? We know he's had a lot on his plate, but can you just give us an assessment of where you think he is now?
Well, I think we all understand the challenges and the difficulties that the president faced immediately after taking over last January. And it was really a very significant gesture on his part to place the first call to a foreign world leader, President Mahmoud Abbas, exactly the day after he took over and the end of the inauguration celebrations. Also, it was interesting, the appointment of Senator George Mitchell a few days after that as well. So that sent a very strong signal to all the parties, and to us in particular, that this administration is going to show more engagement and more involvement in the search for peace in the Middle East. And then, of course, after that, his speech in Cairo, which really was an excellent attempt on the part of the U.S. President to reach out to the Arab and Muslim worlds, to tell the Arab and the Muslim worlds that, you know, this country wants to be friends. They don't want to be enemies. And I agree with him. There is no reason for Arabs and Muslims to be enemies of the United States and vice versa. And all these statements and good gestures somehow sent assuring signals to the Palestinians, the Arabs, and the Muslims that the administration is intent on doing something different. And I believe that this intent and this conviction still exists. But what we want to see now, hopefully in the year 2010, is a different new approach by the administration, not new ideas. We have an abundance of ideas. We need a different approach where the United States can be even-handed, balanced, firm, and creative, trying to resolve this long conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis and the larger Arab-Israeli conflict. So we still believe that the administration, the president himself, are committed to the cause of peace in the Middle East, and we hope that in the very near future we'll see some practical steps on their part, along with the support and the help of the international community and the regional powers in the Middle East, to try to advance the search of peace forward.
Well, you know, I had the opportunity to serve as a surrogate for then Senator Obama as he was running for president. I worked the entire 2 years. I continued to serve as a presidential partner. And I agree with you that there have been many good words, and that is what I expected him to do. But one of the things I guess I always hope is that people do not jump all over him every time he doesn't, you know, make everything perfect and do everything at one time. I know that I will continue to depend upon him to follow up on his word, and I appreciate the positive light in which you have put it. I hope his very election has given hope to our Palestinian brothers and sisters, as well as to our Israeli brothers and sisters, because
Absolutely.
I'm sure there are many of them who want peace. They want you know, everyone to have independence and to live a good life. So we have to think positively, and while we're thinking, also have to continue to work toward the positive and not jump all over him every time he cannot do exactly what we is. It is what it is. It's a difficult situation, and I believe in my heart that he wants to do the right thing, and given just a little bit of help from our Congress, he will do the right thing.
Well, you have to also remember that he is the first U.S. president to say that resolving the conflict in the Middle East and the establishment of a Palestinian state is a national security interest for the United States of America.
Yes.
And when he says that, I think he means what he says. And therefore, this is another reason that we are hopeful that he will carry out that vision. And I think, like you said earlier, he is trying to make things better for both Palestinians and Israelis. I don't think he wants just to. I think it is important to end the suffering of the Palestinian people who have been under occupation for the last 42 years and allow them to establish their own independent, sovereign state there to live side by side in peace and security with Israel. But I think he's also trying to help Israel, which has a very special relationship to this country, yes, by trying to end this conflict.
When we say it the way that you've just said it, and that's the way I mean it, is that it's in the best interest of the United States to resolve this, and because we want what is good and what is necessary for the Palestinian people does not mean that we're anti-Israel.
Absolutely.
And I have been, I've found myself in that situation where I've, spoken out on these issues for years, and immediately some friends take it to mean that if I am for a balanced Middle East policy, then I have to be against Israel. That simply is not true.
No, this is a win-win situation for both sides. The Israelis have to understand that ending the Israeli military occupation, allowing the Palestinians to live in dignity and freedom,
yes,
is something that will serve Israel's long-term interest. It's the lack of peace in the region, the continuation of the Palestinian suffering and frustration that undermines Israel's interest and security in the long term.
It's exactly, I sort of describe the situation the same, and I am an African American, but it's the way that African Americans have often been treated in this country. And while we've made a lot of progress, we're not all free in this country until, all of us are free, including African Americans, Hispanics, and many others who've come to this country. We all work to make it a better country, and all of us deserve a lot more than we sometimes see from our own country.
It's something to learn from, ma'am.
Yes. I saw that you worked with Dr. Hanan Ashrawi at one time. What was that like?
Well, Dr. Hanan Ashrawi is a very distinguished and very, very unique personality that I had the pleasure to work with. When I first returned from the United States in 1992, she was still serving as the spokesperson of the Palestinian delegation to the peace negotiations. She was based at the Orient House in Jerusalem. And I remember, applying to work for her. She was setting up a press center at the Orient House to follow up on negotiations, and I was lucky enough to be picked by her from among probably 36 people, and it was interesting to work with such a professional, intelligent, eloquent, sophisticated lady, and she is the one who opened the door for me to get involved and to help me to reach where I reach today.
Wonderful, Ambassador. We're going to be going to break in just a moment. Welcome back to CNI Jerusalem Calling, your source for unfiltered Mideast talk radio. Again, I'm your host, Dr. Faye Williams, and we're talking with Ambassador Maen Rashid Areikat. As we went to break, I was asking the question, if there are any specifics you would like to see the Obama administration do to move the peace process closer to a final status negotiation.
As I said earlier, we need to take a totally new approach to problem solving. I think it's important to focus on the larger picture, but also it is important to hold both parties liable to their previous obligations, to be able to say that this party is helping the process move forward and that party is not helping the process move forward, without pointing fingers and assigning blame. But it is important that this overall U.S. vision and strategy that was outlined by President Obama, the national security interest thing about, resolving the conflict and the establishment of a Palestinian state, to be implemented in a in a way that will preserve the interests of the United States and also the interests of the Israelis and the Palestinians. I think from our past experiences, we have learned a very good lesson that open-ended negotiations are not going to produce any results. There has to be a time frame for these negotiations, a very clear time frame for these negotiations. It's not a deadline that we are seeking, but we need to know that by the end of 2010, by the mid of 2011, there has to be a conclusion. A Palestinian state will be established then. This is very important to give Palestinians hope that this process is leading somewhere. The other important issue is we need to know what are the terms of reference. There has to be clarity regarding the terms of reference. The Palestinians, as well as the Arabs, have always been driven by United Nations Security Council resolutions. The Arab Peace Initiative, which was a Saudi initiative, was turned into an Arab Peace Initiative in March 2002 at the Arab Summit in Beirut, Lebanon. Constitute an excellent basis for ending the conflict between Arabs and Israelis, given that Israel withdraws from all the occupied territories that they occupied in 1967 and allow the Palestinians to establish their own state. So we need clear terms of reference. And finally, we need to know what the end game is. There has to be a very clear reference to what the end game is. The Palestinians want to see an end to the Israeli military occupation that began in 1967, and they want to establish their independent, sovereign Palestinian state to live side by side in peace and security with Israel. So the more the United States work on these three elements, the more clarity they provide when it comes to these three elements, I think the better the chances will be for the advancement of the peace process.
You mentioned the Security Council resolutions, and specifically the one with withdrawal from the occupied territories. I guess that's one we've been hoping for a very long time. It's just a simple matter of abiding by what is already there, abiding
Absolutely.
by the rules that are already there.
It's no secret that Israel has been defying the UN Security Council resolutions for more than 50 years, and they haven't been complying with the international law and the United Nations and the international community well. So I think a good approach would be also to hold all parties liable and responsible to meet their obligations.
As you know, tomorrow is the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and as we approach his birthday, we're all here. We're in the United States. We'll be praying for independence and peace for people all over the world, because I think basically Americans understand that no one deserves to live under occupation. No one deserves to live under cruel circumstances. So we hope that this year, urged by the President, will be the year that we will see some serious move toward peace and independence in the Middle East. And I was just wondering, I know that the Palestinians have made a lot of concessions, have hoped for a number of years that the resolutions would be abided by, but what do you think are some of the concessions that Palestinians are still prepared to make, or maybe a few that they have made that are still out there in peace negotiations?
Well, first of all, let me just say something about Martin Luther King. I think he was an inspiration to millions of people here in this country, as well as outside of the United States. It just showed you that when you struggle for a just cause, you eventually are going to win. And the struggle of the African Americans in this country is also an inspiration to other peoples around the world that you should never cease and rest before you can achieve justice and equality. And our struggle in the Middle East is exactly for that purpose, to be treated equally, to achieve justice in the Middle East, and justice can only be served if the Palestinians are living in dignity and in freedom. I don't like to talk about concessions because I think we have made a historical compromise, I would say, in 1988 when the Palestinian National Council clearly renounced violence and recognized Israel's right to exist. That happened 22 years ago, and still we are waiting for a courageous Israeli leadership to come and say, well, the same way the Palestinians are recognizing the right of Israel to exist, and they are putting the name of Israel on their own maps after decades of denying the existence of the State of Israel, we are still waiting for an Israeli leadership that will say, well, the Palestinians also deserve to have their own state and start putting Palestine on their own maps and acknowledge that Palestine is there to exist as well. We have come a long way. We have a pragmatic Palestinian leadership right now. which is willing to coexist with Israel, which is willing to pursue peaceful means to resolve the conflict. But you cannot guarantee that this leadership will last forever if Israel does not reciprocate and does not understand that they need also to give up their policies of aggression and occupation and oppression and the humiliation of the Palestinian people, because the Palestinian leadership has to deliver to its own public. And if they fail to do that, they will be in a very difficult position. And the alternative could be not only religious groups taking over, but maybe ultranational groups taking over and start the struggle all over again and start promoting the old cliches about the one binational state. Now there is an opportunity for a two-state solution. We should seize this opportunity.
We do hear a lot about concessions that Palestinians have made all along, but have there also been any substantive moves by the Israelis? And if not, what can they do to get peace talks off the ground? And I think you've addressed a part of that.
Right. Well, we have gone through a very fundamental transformation following the Oslo Accords in 1993. I believe that we Palestinians have shown a lot of good faith and goodwill in terms of accepting Israel and in terms of willing to accommodate the historic land of Palestine in a way that that if we achieve our goal of getting a state in the West Bank, Gaza, with East Jerusalem as its capital, which is our goal, we will only be getting 22% of what used to be historic Palestine prior to the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. So we're getting basically less than 1/4 of what used to be historically our land. And I think this should be an incentive and strong motivation for the Israelis to understand that this is the time to strike a deal with this pragmatic Palestinian leadership.
We started out talking about Senator George Mitchell and his appointment. What is your assessment of the job that Senator Mitchell has done thus far, and is there something you'd like to see him do?
Well, Senator Mitchell is a man of integrity. He is a very, very persistent, patient person. I had the pleasure of meeting with him in October during a round of discussions that we had with them. I very much believe that he is sincere. I very much believe that he is balanced and he wants to see an end to this conflict. But you mentioned also that this is a very, very difficult task. It's a very difficult challenge. But the encouraging thing that we are seeing from Senator Mitchell is that he is still determined to continue with his mission and that he is determined to bridge the gaps between the parties. He is in Europe as we speak, deliberating with European countries. He will be in the region next week to hold another round of discussions with Palestinians, Israelis, and other regional countries. So this in itself is an indication that this is a man who has a strong resolve. Hopefully he is being guided by the president, who is personally committed to resolving this conflict.
Now, in an interview with Charlie Rose, Senator Mitchell mentioned the U.S. loan guarantees to Israel could be used as a levying tool. Do you think the United States is prepared to do so? And if so, how should they? And just before we went to break, Ambassador, I was asking the question about the interview with Charlie Rose, where Senator Mitchell mentioned the U.S. loan guarantees to Israel that could be used as a levying tool. Do you think the United States is prepared to do so? And if so, how should they?
Well, I think, one, the United States has a very special relationship with Israel, and anyone has to admit that they, of course, do have a leverage with Israel. The United States supports Israel in very different respects, and therefore they do have a strong leverage with Israel. I don't know if that leverage should be done in trying to pressure the Israelis. I personally believe that maybe communicating, explaining positions, and trying to convince the Israelis of the wisdom of pursuing peace and ending the conflict by showing that the United States is a true friend of the State of Israel. They want to preserve also the long-term interests of the State of Israel by ending that conflict. And therefore, the United States has also to protect and preserve its own principles and to make sure that all the countries of the world comply with international law. The issue of the settlement expansion, I think the loan guarantees for your listeners were given to Israel in the early 90s to help Israel absorb Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union. And it amounted to $10 billion over a certain period of years. And the condition at the time was that the United States will deduct amounts from that loan guarantee if they verify that they have been used to build and expand illegal settlements on Palestinian land and in the occupied West Bank and Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. And I think that the United States should stand for its principles and should make sure that whatever support and financial support that they provide to any country will not be used to violate international law and to violate the very principles of the United States. But the most important thing is to follow a very frank, honest dialogue with the Israelis and with the Palestinians that this is the time to end the conflict because it is in the interest of both sides to see that happen.
When I see situations like Haiti and I see what happens with a lot of young people in the Middle East and just terrible things happening all over the world, I often wonder how there could be such a meanness of spirit sometimes, how there could be, such pushback on trying to bring about peace. And I sometimes wonder, like many Americans, how many times do we have to prove our friendship, with Israel and that we have this special relationship? I sometimes just want to scream, friends don't make life difficult for friends.
Absolutely.
And I sometimes think that the leaders of Israel often make life difficult for our political leaders in this country by insisting upon not having a fair Middle East policy or a balanced Middle East policy.
I think the American Jewish community has to play an important role as well. You have a very large, influential, respectable American Jewish community in the United States, which should also play an important role in explaining to Israel that it is in their interest to see that conflict come to an end. Unfortunately, although there are many among the American Jewish community who are doing that, who are trying to explain to Israel that it will be in their interest to see a strong Palestinian state next to Israel.
Right. And we are blessed in this country because we do have many Jewish friends who say exactly what you're saying. They want to see Israel, that they have a strong connection with, do the right thing there. So we're blessed when we find people. I remember a few years ago I ran for the United States Congress. I had a Palestinian campaign manager, and I had a Jewish woman who was my issues director. But I was still accused of being anti-Israel because my position was for a balanced Middle East policy. I never can understand why people would be opposed to balance. No one deserves to live under occupation.
Absolutely.
So it seemed that all of us would be working to end that occupation.
In the course of my work, I have contacts with different Jewish organizations, those who are on the right, those who are in the middle, those on the left. I have contacts with AIPAC, I have contacts with J Street, I have contacts with American Peace Now, and we talk to different counterparts. It is important for us to keep the dialogue going on. It's important for us to explain to them where we come from and for them to understand that this should be a win-win situation for both sides. It doesn't mean that if we get a strong state, it will be a threat to Israel. On the contrary, we want to create a state that can live, alongside Israel and be a good neighbor of Israel. But this cannot happen when the Israelis are trying to impose things on us by force.
Yes, and Ambassador, we want to go to our lines, if you don't mind, for just a moment. We have Mariah from Eugene. I assume that's Oregon.
Thank you very much for taking my call. I have a comment and a question. My comment is that Martin Luther King would never have advocated segregation in the Holy Land, and he never used words such as healthy and viable in advocating for his people, our people. He used the word equality. My question actually is, do you think that the U.S. has lost credibility because of its unfortunate rejection of the Goldstone report?
I believe that they haven't read the report to start with carefully, and they haven't understood what was the meaning of the Goldstone report. To start with, Judge Goldstone is a Zionist, is defended similar situations and cases in different parts of the world, and I think he was reflecting. He was trying to be balanced and even-handed, and he was reflecting on a very, very unfortunate situation that took place with Israel's aggression and attack against Palestinian civilians a year ago. And this really struck me that the Congress immediately voted against the Goldstone report without even reading the report. So this is one thing that...
Don't be offended. Many of them said they didn't read the health reform bill either.
Well, I am not, but I think this would require a completely different mentality and approach by the political establishment here. They have to understand that today's world, countries must be held liable for their actions, and the Goldstone report was an attempt to make sure that this does not happen again in the future, and that countries who carry out similar actions of aggression will be held liable and accountable for their actions.
We're talking with Ambassador Maen Rashid Areikat. And Jack, I need you to ask the question. If you had a question of the ambassador, we have a few more questions we need to deal with.
I don't think Israel's going to make any moves whatsoever without a lot of pressure from the outside. So I'd like to comment on that.
There has to be an active third-party role, not only in the implementation of any future agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis, something we lacked in previous accords with Israel. The Oslo Accord in particular, unfortunately, did not involve a third-party role. But we also need that third-party role in the conducting of the negotiations. And the United States, along with the international community, the Quartet, the United Nations, Russia, and the European Union, can play an important role during the negotiations. I agree 100% with you that we don't want an open-ended negotiations. This is exactly what I said earlier when we said that we need a very, very well-defined time frame to end and conclude these negotiations.
And my question, Ambassador, was, are there any developments in reconciliation talks between Hamas and Fatah?
Well, unfortunately, not much to report other than the fact that in October, the PLO and the largest faction, Fatah, endorsed the paper that was submitted by the Egyptians who are mediating between Fatah and Hamas. And as you know, Hamas until today refuses to endorse that paper. We continue to work with Egypt, who is exerting excellent efforts to bring the two sides together. I believe that divisions among the Palestinians only hurt the national interests of the Palestinian people, and in order to be able to achieve our national goals, we have to be united and hope to see the divisions end very soon.
Well, we're kind of facing that in our country between the progressives and the conservatives and the moderates. We're trying to get health care passed, and we're having difficulty getting our own sides together on some of these things. So I guess it kind of goes on all over the world.
Absolutely.
But we will pray for reconciliation between the two. Are there any plans for elections in Gaza and this year?
Well, the elections, unfortunately, are directly linked to the success of the reconciliation efforts. President Abbas, the PLO, planned to have elections, in October, November, and to hold them actually in about 10 days of today. That's when the term of the PLC and the president end. But unfortunately, Hamas refused to allow officials from the Central Election Commission from entering Gaza to prepare the ground for these elections, and therefore the president issued a decree postponing the elections until the conditions are changed on the ground to allow for these elections to be held both in the West Bank, Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip.
Now, I know we've heard a lot about the difficulty of a reconstruction in Gaza. I wonder how the reconstruction activities are going there now, and has the flow of materials sped up in any way?
Well, actually, there has been no reconstruction at all due to the Israeli siege, which prevents building materials from entering Gaza. According to the UN, 6,400 homes were destroyed during Israel's assault, and thousands of people were left homeless, living in tents. And the situation is very bad. Many international and the human rights groups, including Amnesty International and Oxfam, issued a statement accusing the international community of betraying the people of Gaza because it has failed to end the siege. And the situation is very, very, very dire there. 90% of the population suffer from power shortages for as long as 8 hours a day. UNRWA is suffering, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency is suffering as a result of an inadequate and sanitary water supplies, and there has been a rise in infant mortality. So the situation is very difficult. I don't think there is enough effort being exerted on the part of the international community to allow for these supplies to enter Gaza, to end the Israeli siege of the Gaza Strip and allow the reconstruction efforts to start.
How crippling to the peace process is Israel's continued settlement activity in East Jerusalem?
Very crippling. I think Israel's continued colonization of occupied East Jerusalem makes the reaching of an agreement all but impossible. Right now we have 190,000 Israeli settlers living illegally in East Jerusalem. It strikes me sometimes when you read in the press here calling these Jewish neighborhoods or things. These are not Jewish neighborhoods. They were built on illegally confiscated Palestinian land, and they were built illegally in violation of international law. By creating facts on the ground, Israel is trying to forestall the possibility of East Jerusalem becoming the capital of a future Palestinian state, without which there can be no lasting resolution to the conflict. And just recently, the Israeli press reported Prime Minister Netanyahu saying that Israel would never cede any part of Jerusalem or share it with a future Palestinian state. I don't think the policies that Israel is taking in Jerusalem to expand settlements, to build new settlements, to deny the native residents of Jerusalem, the Palestinians of Jerusalem, the right to reside in the city by revoking their identity cards. I don't think all these policies will prevent the Palestinians from continuing to struggle to keep Jerusalem and to have Jerusalem as a future capital for their state. The international community, including the United States, have said many times that they do not recognize Israel's illegal annexation of the city, and they do not accept the legitimacy of the continued Israeli settlement activity inside Jerusalem, inside and around the city of Jerusalem.
You know, here in the United States, through our long struggle for civil rights and equality, our leaders have often been called militant, angry, violent, and other names. And I'm just wondering where the Palestinian nonviolent leaders are. We've seen that question before. We had Alison Ware who responded to it here in the United States. But what is your assessment of that? Where are the Palestinian nonviolent leaders?
Well, I think from the start of the Israeli military occupation, and I recall when I was very young, that Palestinians resorted to demonstrations, to peaceful expressions of resistance to the Israeli occupation. I remember students and residents just taking part in demonstrations in different cities. I lived in Jericho. My hometown city was Jericho. And I saw them in my own eyes demonstrating against the Israeli army, which confronted them with brute force and with violence by beating them, by shooting at them, by injuring and killing many of them. And that, somehow made Palestinians, unfortunately, think that peaceful resistance is not going to pay off. And
I imagine a lot of the nonviolent leaders are probably in prison.
Absolutely. You remember this.
Often.
You remember the story of that leading Palestinian activist who was banned from the occupied Palestinian territory in the 80s, because he was advocating non-violent resistance. And despite all that, the Palestinian leadership, the PLO, the president, are advocating a peaceful approach to solving the conflict with Israel.
Ambassador, I just want to get Gloria on for a second from Ohio, if we could just sort of cut your response short. Gloria? Well, I suppose she had to go away because it's about time for us to go away. I want to thank you, Ambassador Maen Rashid Areikat, for enlightening us today. We thank you for the discussion. We, of course, have learned a lot, and we pray for all of our brothers and sisters in the Middle East that we will soon know peace. 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 We will